So the title is a multi-criteria approach for risk assessment of COVID-19 in urban district lockdowns. Valentino, you have the virtual podium.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, in this work, I will introduce the problem of the spread of the virus, in particular in Apulia region. It is worth noting that we are developing a model to understand the best strategy in lockdown condition. So after this introduction, I will explain the methodology that uses multi-criteria approaches typically applied in the risk assessment in order to obtain some forecasting scenarios. So the goal of the research is to obtain a tool, an easy tool that allows to administration and government to limit the risk of contagion in urban districts, but at the same time avoid even more serious crises derived from the lockdown. This methodology is calibrated with a nonlinear analysis, and in addition, a comparison with a similar model developed with artificial neural network is proposed to compare the two different approaches. So, first of all, a brief introduction. We know very well the situation, and actually there are about 167 countries in lockdown condition. And the question is how we can gradually stop the lockdown by avoiding the crisis, the economical crisis, and how we can do to select the best strategy for this intervention. Here in this work, we used the situation in Puglia for calibrate the model, because in Puglia there is a very singular spread of the virus. And here I can introduce the history of this infection. First of all, the 25th of February, the infection started in the north of Italy. And after about 2 weeks, in the 8th of March, the virus was widespread in the north. And in this moment, there is a very important situation in the south, because people and all of the citizens that was working in the north of Italy decided to come back in their city of birth. So the south of Italy, and in particular in Puglia. So in this moment, in Puglia, we registered a uniform distribution of the virus. To this aim, the successive distribution of the infected people is related to the typology of activities, movement, and work activities that are performed in the territory. And here you can see the actual situation of the contagion. So to sum up, the important date for our model and calibration are the 8th of March, when a lot of people come back in Puglia, and there are not some important restriction for the population. So the virus is free to be spread all over the region. In addition, in the second important date is the 24th of March, that we consider the effective lockdown for the Apulia region, because it's the period where the application of the restriction became effective in Puglia. Another important consideration is that we can register the effect of the situation after 2 weeks. And so these are the 3 data important for our model. But what we have to do now, we want to understand which are the characteristics of the territory that influence the spread of the virus. So this is the question: which are the characteristics that can influence the diffusion of the virus? To answer to this question, we developed a four-step methodology. First of all, we defined the involved parameter with a multi-criteria approach. We set a data acquisition procedure, and we calibrate the model with a generalized reduced gradient method. And finally, as I told you before, we compared this approach with a very different analysis based on artificial neural network in order to compare the two approaches and validate the model. Okay, so this is the first step of the procedure, where we defined all the parameters involved by using a multi-criteria approach. And in particular, we used a multi-criteria analysis that is specifically used for the risk analysis, that is based on a factorial formula. In particular, from the literature are defined these three factors that are hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. The hazard is defined as the frequency and the intensity of an hostile phenomenon. The vulnerability is the inability to resist to this phenomenon, and the exposure is related to the possibility that the phenomenon causes loss of life. So we adapt and customize this model for our situation. So the analysis of the risk in urban district. To this aim, the hazard is related to the possibility of contagion and include three sub-criteria: the number of infected people, the not immune people, and the mobility. To consider the movement between different urban districts of people and consequently the spread of the virus. The second parameter is the vulnerability that depends from the urban district characteristic, in particular the population density and all the activities and the companies that work and act on the territory. And these are a lot of parameters. In fact, in total, we consider 55 of these sub-criteria. In the end, the exposure is considered by the age of inhabitants, because in the related literature it is demonstrated that the age of inhabitants is very important for the critical consequences of the virus. So I want to focus the attention on the vulnerability. These are all the sub-criteria. And the question is, why vulnerability can be so important? Because the vulnerability is the parameter that we can control with the lockdown condition. And so by reducing the in the situation of lockdown, we can avoid the contagion. So in particular, a lot of countries, almost all the countries that suffered this contagion used this lockdown condition, but that have very important consequences on the economy. So it is very important to understand which of these activities should be closed or not by analyzing every single situation. And this is one of the goals of this approach, understand which are the best strategy for the intervention. The second step is regarding the data acquisition. In particular, we extract data from the National Institute of Statistics, and this information are used to understand the activities and the company that work in the local territory. And we acquire information about the contagion from the civil protection, the data of the civil protection. So by using the multi-criteria approach and the factorial formula, it's possible to define the risk formulation, and the calibration is devoted to identify the weights of the criteria and sub-criteria. addition, as I told you before, it's very important the singular situation of Puglia, because there is in the beginning a uniform distribution of the virus. So we take for the calibration two important periods, the 24th of March and the 8th of April, because in the 8th of April we can register the infection related to what happened in this temporal period from the 8th of March and the 24th of March. So these are the initial condition and the final condition. And the assumption is that the improvement of the contagion is related to the three factors that we defined: the hazard, the vulnerability, and the exposure. For this calibration, we considered a total of 267 urban districts. And of course, the number of infections that we acquired from the data of the civil protection. This is the diffusion of the virus are map provided from the civil protection in Apulia region. In order to obtain the calibration, we used a generalized reduced gradient method for obtaining the calibration, and we minimized the differences between the factorial formula that we defined and the real effective infection that we registered in the final step, in the final period of our analysis. So by run this calibration, we get the importance of every subcriterion, of every parameter. And these results are in line for what we can expect from literature and for what we saw in these days, because the age of inhabitants is one of the most important parameters. And the other parameter regarding the distribution of the characteristic of our urban district. For example, the presence of open cafe and restaurant, the number of infected people, not immune people, and so on. So this is a very important result, not only for the quantification of the importance of every parameter, but also because we obtained the weight useful to use this factorial formulation. By using this approach, we can define different scenarios. For example, here we identify three different risk analysis. One in full lockdown condition, another hypothesis that regard the partial reopening of the activities in every urban district, and the third scenarios that consider all the businesses and the institution open. Of course, this analysis can be performed also for every single urban district in order to understand which are the best local strategy in order to obtain some map of risk and understand if there are some particular characteristics and activities that can be safeguarded from the lockdown. So the first positive aspect of this approach are the possibility to use this equation in a very easy way, and it can be very useful for administration and government to obtain a rapid analysis of the risk of every option of and every policy. The only one negative aspect is that the equation governing the phenomenon is defined a priori. And for validate this assumption, we realize a very different method to compare. We decided to choose the artificial neural network because it's particularly effective to take the nonlinearity into account and to verify the reliability of the two approaches. So this is a very schematic evaluation that represent the phases of the calibration and the training of the artificial neural network. And by training this network, we are able to obtain similar map of risk. For example, in this slide, I am showing you the forecasting scenarios obtained by the two approaches. As you can see, there is a very similar result with very small differences. And here we can see the scenario in no lockdown condition. So to sum up, in conclusion, the artificial neural network have a good accuracy. On the contrary, on the other hand, there is a difficulty to understand the importance of each parameters by using this approach, and it is very complex for administration and government to use this tool. On the other hand, the multicriteria analysis based on the factorial equation is a very easy and fast tool to be used. There are only slight lower accuracy in comparison with the artificial neural network, but we verified that these differences are not relevant for the analysis and for the forecasting scenarios. So in conclusion, the future research and this tool is devoted to understand the best choice for every urban district. So we can identify for every city the activities and the companies that are not at risk for the spread of the virus, and the other activities that can represent a problem for the pandemic. To this aim, in conclusion, administration and government can use this tool to select the best strategy for every urban district. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks. It was really interesting because we saw a different approach to the problem, and the answers were really inspiring, let me say. Martina, do we have a question, I think?
Yes, we have a question from YouTube, actually.
Okay.
So it comes from Danilo Spasiano, and he says that it is very interesting that the model includes 46 parameters for the vulnerability assessment, and this can be very useful for identifying the best strategies. So this can forecasting model detect zero risk areas?
Okay, thank you for the question, first of all. And of course, yes, this model can also identify the zero risk because, for example, one of the parameters, in particular the parameter of the exposure, depend from the number of infection. So if we want to understand when it is possible to have zero risk, we need to have zero infected people, a higher number of immune people, and reduced mobility. In this condition, with this model, we can register very low risk, and we can also arrive to a risk zero for some particular situation.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think there is also a question by... No, sorry. I think it was the last one.
Any other question?
Okay, so thank you again, Valentino, for the nice talk. And
thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And,
you're welcome.
to allow us to share our work.